What's up YouTube? Today's video I'm going to bring you the definitive answer to which Ascendancy you should play. Should you play Champion, should you play Raider, or should you play Berserker? Now, a lot of people have always been wondering what should you actually play between Raider and Berserker, but there appears to be a new challenger in the mix, right? There's been a lot of hype surrounding Champion just because of his performance in the Gauntlet and a lot of people wanting to play a tankier character. So I'm going to go over all three and I'm going to give you this foolproof methodology that you could use to choose which one you play. Pretty much you answer three simple questions, and by the end of the three questions, you'll figure out which Ascendancy is right for you. Now, before we do that, I'm going to go over all three classes, what are the pros and cons, and what its strengths and weaknesses are, so you can have a pretty good general overview going into choosing which Ascendancy for Lightning Strike. Now, I do believe that Lightning Strike or Helix into Lightning Strike will be the strongest League starter just because of how good the build is for map clearing and for bossing and how tanky overall the build can get to with some investment into the gear. So first off, we have my favorite character, favorite Ascendancy, and it is Berserker. Now, Berserker is the highest damage scaling late game powerhouse, and that's because of all of the more multipliers you have. So if you look at Berserker and what nodes you actually get, you get 40% more damage, and you get 40% more attack speed from Blitz charges, and you also get to use Berserk, which has like 60 to 70% uptime on bosses, which is 20% more damage, 20% more attack speed, and 30% more movement speed, right? And then this also gets scaled by the Berserk effect on the helm. So all of those more multipliers allows you to stack damage, and it's exponentially scaling. So you have some absurd damage levels. So Berserker will almost guarantee to do like 2 to 3 times more damage than Champion or Raider at the end game. Now, the damage is probably overkill after 30 to 40 million DPS. Like, you probably won't really notice it that much unless you're farming like simulacrums nonstop. Now, Berserker also has two additional buttons to press in that you have to spam Withering Step and Berserk on cooldown. So you want to put the General's Cry on the left click. Now, the reason you want to put the General's Cry on the left click is because of this node that gives you Rage if you use a War Cry, right? So that's why we need to use General's Cry. General's Cry has the least cooldown. And then we want to automate the General's Cry, and we'll be putting it on the left click. So we need to be spamming Withering Step to refresh Nightblade, and then we want to be using Berserk to maintain Berserk throughout the map. So those are the two extra buttons you have to press that Champion and Raider do not have to press. Now, the attack speed is up to 2 to 3 times higher, and this can be seen by if you look at a PoB. So this is a Champion Lightning Strike PoB, you have 9.74. And if you look at a super late game Berserker, it's 29.69, right? So the attack speed is a pretty big difference. It's not 3 times higher, but it's probably around like 2 times higher. And this is more noticeable once you get the Forbidden Flame and Flesh Jewel for Rite of Ruin. Now, the movement speed is also a pretty big difference because Berserk does give you a more multiplier on movement speed. So the movement speed can reach up to 300%. And Berserker is a pretty tanky character. You can still get 50k armor, you can still get 50% evasion, and you can get 100% spell suppression, and you can still get 83% maximum res if you use Brass Dome. And most importantly, Berserker can wear Headhunter and Mage Blood. It's not pigeonholed into having to use Perseverance. And Perseverance is a pretty insane belt, right? So on the topic of Perseverance, we move on to Champion. Now, Champion has very high damage for League starting because of Perseverance and Perma Adrenaline. Adrenaline is a node on Champion that you can proc if you reach 50% life. And you can see here, Adrenaline grants 100% increased damage, 25% increased attack, cast, and movement speed, and 10% physical damage reduction. And this node also gives you free Intimidate, and then this node also gives you a bunch of aura effect, which allows you to use the Champion belt. So if you go look at the Champion Lightning Strike PoB, you will see that Perseverance, this belt gives you 1% increased attack damage per 200 of the lowest armor and evasion rating. Now, for a Champion profile, you can see you have around 70k evasion and 70k armor. So this belt is around 350% increased damage, right? So you have 350% increased damage, and then you have 100% increased damage from Perma Adrenaline. So you can see right here that with Champion, you get so much free percent increased damage that this is incredibly strong early game. And if you want to see how good Perseverance is, you can see here this is 5 million DPS. You take off Perseverance, you lose half your damage, right? And it's around the same, almost as good as Omni. Now, the build is incredibly tanky against hits because of having 70k armor and evasion. So you can see here you have 90% evade and 90% physical damage reduction. So you're pretty much immortal against hits. You also have permanent fortify, and this is pretty nice for bossing when you cannot hit the boss. Say you're doing like Syrian Exarch fight or something like that, or you're trying to do the Shaper Ball phase where you can't hit the boss or there's no boss. So permanent fortify is super nice. But the big problem is you can't wear Headhunter or Mage Blade easily. A lot of your damage scaling comes from Perseverance, so you just lose so much damage from using Headhunter or Mage Blood. And you have to keep up perma adrenaline with Divine Blessing, so you pretty much have to keep track of when your adrenaline runs off. This is not really that big of a deal. It's pretty much a button you have to press once every 20 seconds. And most importantly, Molten Shell is incredibly broken, and because your armor value is so high, whenever you have Molten Shell on, your character is pretty much unkillable. But champion, you might be like, oh, the champion damage is around 20 mil or 30 mil. Well, 20 or 30 mil with these defenses is more than enough to do everything in the game. Now, the only problem with the champion is unless you stack max res, your life pool is around like 4.5 to 5k. And 4.5 to 5k is kind of weak against elemental damage if your resists are stuck at 75 res. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, next up, we have Raider, right? Raider is kind of an interesting case. I don't really like it that much. If you want a tankier character or you want an easier playstyle, Raider doesn't really offer that much. Now, what Raider does offer is it lets you get spell suppression capped really easily because it gives you 40% right there. And it also allows you to get ailment immunity, which is actually a pretty big deal if you intend on farming simulacrums because it gives you 50% chance to avoid on this node, right? So you can pretty much get 100% spell suppression, ailment immunity super early on. Raider is the simplest playstyle as you don't even need to keep up adrenaline like the champion and you have really no extra buttons. And Raider does have better late game damage than champion if you fully invest into stacking frenzy charges because Raider will take these ascendancy nodes and this one gives you a bunch of stuff for frenzy charges. Now, stacking frenzy charges is pretty expensive, and most frenzy charge like implicit rings are very costly. And Raider has the problem that it actually has the worst early game damage, right? There's no more multipliers. You can't really use perseverance because your armor value is super gimped because of where you start on at the tree. And you don't have the perma adrenaline for champion for that free 100% extra damage. So Raider is like kind of a defensive ascendancy and quality of life ascendancy that really lacks the damage to immediately be able to do red tier map bosses with ease. And most importantly, Raider also doesn't have access to Fortify. Champion has perma Fortify from this node Fortitude, and Raider, it's kind of hard to go get the Fortify node over here or to go all the way over here to get Fortify like Berserker. So Raider actually ends up being probably the least tanky out of the three, right? And that's something to keep in mind. So let's go straight into the steps to figure out which one you should play. Now, first step is you have to ask yourself if Lightning Strike will be a stepping stone for your next build, or if you intend to play Lightning Strike and you want to min-max the build towards the end, right? So if you want to play like Spark Aura Stacker for Champion, or you want to play Venom Giant Berserker later on, or you want to play Tornado Shot Deadeye, then the answer is pretty much already chosen for you unless you want to re-level your character. So if you want to play Spark Aura Stacker, you should just always choose the Champion. If you want to be the Venom Gyre person, you want to choose Berserker. And if you want to play Tornado Shot Omni Deadeye, you want to be Raider, right? This should be a no-brainer. So if you're using Lightning Strike as a stepping stone, then your choice is already made for you, right? But if you intend to re-level a character for your second build, like say like you don't care, you just want the strongest starter, or if you want to min-max the Lightning Strike character, then we need to move on to step 2. And step 2 is you need to ask yourself if you're willing to press 2 extra buttons during mapping for double damage, double attack speed, and much more move speed, right? And if you're willing to do these, and what you have to press is you need to press Withering Step every 3 seconds optimally. So you need to spam Withering Step on cooldown, and you need to keep up Berserk the whole time. So you need to press it roughly once every like 20 seconds. So that's not too bad, and you do get into a rhythm of pressing it, and it does give you something to do. It's kind of like if you're playing StarCraft and you're just spamming a lot of keys. It kind of feels like that. Now, some people don't like managing this at all. So if you want to, if the answer is yes to this above question, then you should choose Berserker. And if the answer is no to this question, then you need to move on to the next step, right? So at this point, if you're willing to do this, then you should be Berserker. And the next question is you need to ask yourself if you want an invincible character or a more damage oriented character that you can min max and use Mage Blood slash Headhunter. And you should also ask yourself if you want an easier early game, right? If you want an easier early game with an invincible character, then you should choose champion. If you want a more damage oriented min max character with a harder early game and that allows you to be able to use Mage Blood and a Headhunter, then you should choose Raider, right? So pretty much champion, you have Molten Shell, but you have to use Perseverance versus a Raider that you can min max with plus Frenzy charges, and you can eventually use Mage Blood and Headhunter, but you'll have weaker early game damage. Then you should choose Raider, right? So it's pretty much you have to ask yourself if you want your character to be tankier, or you want in late game, or you want a character with more damage in late game that allows you to use these chase unique belts, and that's something you should consider. And something else is that Headhunter might actually be OP, especially with 80 Arch Nemesis modifiers, and that Headhunter might be a de facto choice, a mandatory choice still for juice maps after Chris said on Bay Class that there's over 80 Arch Nemesis modifiers and that he doesn't actually think that Headhunter is much weaker. So overall, I hope those steps made you be able to choose your ascendancy really easily. I know when I spelled it out like that, it made it very simple to find out which ascendancy I should start. I will probably choose Berserker as I want to actually try to play Venom Gyre earlier on. Because last week, Venom Gyre, I wasn't actually able to play until GGG fixed the Whirling Blades bug. And the most important thing is you need to keep in mind your goals for your League Star character, right? You need to think about, am I going to play Lightning Strike the full time? Am I going to try to swap to a more fun build like Venom Jar, Tornado Shot, or Aura Stacker? And another thing to keep in mind is that all three of these builds can easily do all of Endgame, right? All three builds have been proven time and time again to be able to do Fear, Simulacrum Wave 30, Uber Pinnacle bosses. All of them are going to be a joke for the character with some investment. Now, the big thing is that Berserker will have 2x damage, 2x attack speed, and much more move speed. And this matters a little bit, right? So you might think, like, oh, if you look at a Berserker Pob and it has 100 million DPS or 170 mil or 200 mil DPS, that damage is overkill, right? But attack speed and move speed, like 30 attacks per second, translates over to Whirling Blade speed. And move speed of 315%, it translates over to faster map clear. So even though the damage is overkill, it will make you clear simulacrums faster and it will make you map faster. But the biggest thing is playstyle, right? So if you can't press those 2 extra buttons in the intervals that I specified, then you just shouldn't play Berserker, right? Another thing to keep in mind is that the best choice may change because of the Uber Forbidden Flame and Flesh Jewels. Now, GGG hasn't released what they are for Marauder and Duelist, so if Marauder or Duelist gets something completely game-breaking, this could completely tip the scales in one side's favor, right? But we're not really going to know. Or they might release some more teasers because I know that they did Templar and Witch already. But as you can see, this is the Berserker, Raider, and Duelist all standing together, and they're all having a good time because they're all finishing the end game. But in the end, the damage is not equal and the playstyle is not equal. So just follow the steps and the questions I posed, and you'll be able to find your league start. So I hope you find more Mirrors, Exalts, and Mage Bloods than me, and see you next time. Bye.